you'll have a good sense of what's included on them as well. Well, first and foremost, I want to thank David from Yole and the opportunity just to be able to share. What I'm going to share today is not rocket science, and it's probably things that you all are probably well more versed and expert at than myself. But I really wanted to share more from what the whole Zoom experience, what our new normal is all about, and how it's impacted me and how it's made me think about how I want to show up as a leader in this space. And because majority of our work now is all gone virtual, it's fun to think of Zoom as like the Starbucks. We don't say I want coffee anymore. We're like, we want Starbucks. Well, it's not virtual video anymore. I'm Zooming, and everyone seems to know exactly what that means. So focus today is really looking at how we create inclusion in a virtual world. And so I wanted to get started first with this share from this gentleman who posted this on social media. Gentleman who worked for the Canadian federal government, and they sent out an email. His place of employment sent out this email on COVID principles. And it looks like the very first one was a very powerful statement, and it was something that resonated with me and a lot of my colleagues in terms of what does this mean? You are not working from home. You are at your home during a crisis trying to work. And that paradigm and that shift really, again, reminded us that we're not two-dimensional people. What you see on the screen right now, we are not 2D. There is something so much more going on as we're trying to navigate all the different expectations, roles, responsibilities, and then how do we pay attention and show up as that inclusive leader that we all really yearn to be? And, 1 through 6, again, I think they're all incredibly important aspects. Your personal, physical, mental, and emotional health is far more important than anything else right now. You should try not to try and compensate for lost productivity by working longer hours. How many of you, feel free to use raise your hand or leverage the chat, feel that you're working more with a virtual world? I see some head nodding. I definitely do. It's kind of Zoom back to back, At least in the office, I can walk to another meeting. I had many more steps for sure. I think I see in the chat here. Yes, lots of yeses. So when we're thinking about how to create that inclusive environment, we really have to look inwardly in terms of what that means for us, because it's us that sets those schedules, right? Minor things like tweaking our time, instead of a 30-minute meeting, maybe a 25-minute meeting, maybe a 20-minute meeting. And we'd be surprised from a psychological aspect, right, how people are able to adapt so quickly to that. Sometimes people don't even notice that I trimmed 5 minutes off of a meeting or even 15 minutes off of a meeting. And so with that, we really want to look at what being inclusive means for us. And so I'll go ahead and start with that introduction of myself. What inclusion means to me, I am a first-generation South Asian woman that was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. And then my family moved into a very rural part of Michigan. I grew up in the country, and as you can imagine, it was not a very ethnically diverse time period or community that I grew up in. So having very strong connection and roots to my Indian culture, we would travel to India often, and my parents did a wonderful job in making sure that I had exposure and balance between my two cultural identities. And so we often laugh at this story when I go to India and people ask, oh, where are you from? First thing, America. When people ask me in the United States, oh, what's your ethnicity? What's your background? Indian. So it was at a very early age that made me realize this concept of diversity, inclusion, what does it mean to really belong? And so at a young age, I joke that my inclusion journey started when one summer, some of my classmates came up to me and asked me, one, why my skin was brown, and two, they would compare their tans with me. So it was one of those things where it's like, wait, am I in? Am I included or am I not? And what kind of messages do we get throughout childhood that indicate whether we do feel that sense of inclusion and belonging? So that interest carried me all throughout high school, undergrad, and even into graduate school. And I hold a doctorate degree in clinical psychology. So finding that intersection between human behavior and inclusion and leadership really was something of passion and excitement for me. I used to work in academia, and one of the things that I noticed was a very interesting difference between how students, how people of color particularly, got evaluated in the coursework as well as on their clinical site training. And with that passion and interest, I went on to do more research and created my executive coaching practice called The Happy Leader. And with The Happy Leader, I look at 4 different domains and dimensions. One is definitely around self-awareness, as we all know in leadership, such an important aspect and arena. I think oftentimes it goes, it's not given as much importance as it needs to be. And then cultural identity, really looking at racial cultural identity and how that plays a role in how we show up as leaders and our ability to be inclusive. The happiness quotient, looking at what the role of happiness plays into that, and giving back. As we know, blueberries, avocados, and giving back is definitely many of the items on the happiness list there. So giving back was a large piece of looking at what it means to really be an emotionally satisfied and happy leader. So just a little bit about my background and passion and interest around that space in terms of why inclusion is important and how appropriate to bridge inclusion with our virtual working world and reality here. So Zoom, not gloom. What are some of the challenges that we have when we're thinking about working in a virtual environment? For many people, it's interesting, I think the BBC had posted this one article around Zoom fatigue. And it does really require more focus to process nonverbal cues, especially when you've got lots of tiles on your screen and you're looking. I'm paying attention to Mike and saying, okay, is that an inquisitive look? Is he curious? Is he wishing he had stepped off? Engaged, interested, what is it? You know, noticing Virginia's smile. We're always looking for those kinds of points of interest to be able to know, are we on the right track? Are we not? And I think oftentimes we take it for granted when we're in those in-person sessions. A lot of that body language we take for granted. Now, this is an interesting challenge. Silence impacts us differently. They actually claimed some research that looked at if there's a 1.2, right, 1.2 second delay, people were actually perceived as less friendly or focused. Now, I don't know about you, but I got a lot of Zoom technical.
Can you guys hear me? Okay, let me get back. Okay, is that better? Thumbs up, okay. Look at that, I didn't even mention it, and Zoom technical difficulties right on cue. But those subtle challenges, silence, technical difficulties, audio blanking out, all of those things add a layer and a level of stress unknowingly. And not to mention, there were a lot more challenges indicated, but I pulled out these specifically, one because I didn't want to overwhelm or overtax, but there was one point in the article that was really comical, and it said, how often do you enjoy staring at yourself for hours on end? So that was an, some of us may, and that is wonderful for those of us that are like, oh, geez, I need to change my background or do what I need to do. Really sets a level of stress that we're not anticipating and that we're not paying attention to. And then the final challenge when we think about Zoom and not gloom is really the self-complexity theory. It's actually a psychological construct that talks about we appreciate complexity in our life. We appreciate diversity in our life. So when you think about, you know, where you go into for those of us that go into the office or are remote workers, you know, how many of us separate and delineate our work schedule versus driving somewhere, versus going to a gym, versus socializing at different ways and different capacities. And now that's all virtual. So we are socializing, we're working, we're connecting with family, we're working out and exercising, we're meditating, we're doing everything virtually and in one location. And so how that impacts us from a self-complexity aspect is really important to take a look at. And again, those are not things that we talk about so much. I don't know about you, especially those that are listening in, when you think of a Zoom happy hour, do you feel, yay, a point of connection, or do you feel like, not another Zoom meeting? And so those are things that we want to think about. How do we set those up in a way to check in with our colleagues, our peers, our families, our friends, whoever we're Zooming with, in terms of saying, hey, are we giving them permission to not be on video? It's okay not to. Are we giving them permission to be who they need to be and create that sense of belonging in that virtual space and world? And of course, the benefits of Zoom, right? Looking at, we're saving money, time, and effort. We don't have to plan the lunches, the dinners, and those offsites. The efficiency, the opportunity to communicate. It has been so valuable. The work that I do at Gilead, I actually oversee our global coaching and mentoring program. And it has been phenomenal to be in these Zoom meetings with some of the leaders and IM them and say, hey, this would be a great opportunity to bring this aspect up into the conversation. Hey, I really like how you reinforced that coworker or that employee or your direct reports acknowledgement of how hard they're working. Hey, before you jump into an agenda, do you want to just check in with people and see how they're doing? So in my line of work, when it comes to the organizational development, leadership development, I've really appreciated the opportunity to use chat and to communicate in that way. Because again, in person, it would be quite disruptive. And I'm sure a lot of my leaders would not appreciate me acknowledging or calling that out right in the middle of a meeting. But now there's these ways that we can connect in such a meaningful way. And then the opportunity for more inclusion. It's really about inclusion. When we're able to do these micro behaviors in a Zoom meeting, it sets a tone. Not only do we set an example, but we're also being able to give the opportunity for people to really show up as they need to. I don't know if you all have felt this way, but how many pets, children, partners, rooms have you seen in Zoom? We have crossed a level of vulnerability, if you will, to be much more inclusive. So when we're talking about inclusion and belonging, right, many of us know what this means to us personally, and we are continuing that journey to look at what it means to be inclusive. It's really valuing differences. It's really looking at intentional acts of what we could do. Belonging, it's that feeling of being included. You know, growing up, having comments made about how I looked or why my family looked differently, my parents had really talked about, you know, they just don't know, Bindu. Here's an opportunity for you to educate, to talk about it, and really engage in the conversations versus being angry or being frustrated around what and why I was being asked those things and not others. But what was really powerful when I reflect and look back, it's taken all these years to recognize it, but there was a sense of inclusion in being able to share about my culture and my identity and what that really meant. And it was a way to shift a conversation to, ooh, why is that different? To, oh, that's why you're different. I want to learn more. How do we share more? And so I reflect on that a lot. As we know, our previous experiences do shape who we are today, and resiliency and grit, and a lot of Carol Dweck's work around growth mindset is really around how do we take a lot of those meaningful experiences and turn that into lessons that we can not only help in terms of our own inclusive lens on the world, but what it really helped me to hone in on is my level of empathy and understanding of what it's like to walk in another's shoes. You know, a powerful experience I'll share: when I was teaching a course on diversity in graduate school, one of the exercises that I had our students do was to live for 24 hours in a different identity. So we had men dress as women, women dress as men. We had people that, you know, went to a different religious institution to experience. And so, as you can imagine, it was all ends of the continuum in terms of what people experienced and shared and wanted to try. But there was one woman in particular. She was a Anglo-American white woman, stark blue eyes, and she wanted to, Catholic, she wanted to wear a hijab. She wanted to experience what it was like to at least wear the ethnic clothing of a Muslim woman. And so we were able to support her with all of that. And it was interesting because in the class, we talked about the why behind that. And her big reason was that she had this perception, she had this impression that any woman of that ethnic faith that wore that was forced to wear that, and felt that they needed to be liberated or relieved from that. And again, this was her perception of it. And it was a safe space, a psychologically safe space, to be able to talk about what that meant. She wore the hijab, full covering of the Muslim, that Muslim women wear, and went to her same grocery store, went to her same gym, went to all of the places that she had built relationships and people knew her. And she was amazed at how empowering it was for her to have a choice to wear that. And so it shifted her perspective. And as she went through that experience, it really opened her up to connect and talk with more women of that faith. Prior to that, she had not had a single conversation with anyone of that faith. And so that experience for her alone created this sense of empathy and an opportunity to really look at her own bias and where that stemmed from, but also challenged her in terms of how can she be more inclusive just from shifting her perspective on what it meant for her. And so when I think about those kinds of experiences, does it mean that everybody needs to walk in someone else's shoes? Not necessarily. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar had made this statement recently, and I thought it was very powerful. People asked him, what is it that we can do to increase our understanding and be more inclusive of others? And you know what his statement was? His answer to that was, meet somebody different than you and get to know them. Meet somebody different than you and get to know them. And so with that, this research that was done by Ernst & Young, I love this. They found that the greatest sense of belonging comes from colleagues checking in with each other about how they're doing. So I think if anything that you walk away from this Zooming for inclusivity is that it doesn't need to be these magnanimous gestures, earth-shattering. I think the sophistication really comes in the simplicity of those behaviors and the language we use when we're connecting with others. So I wanted to do a Jay Leno. If those of you that are familiar with Jay Leno, he's got his top 10, I may be dating myself, kind of practical tips. And again, these may not be new, but I think these are things that I've reflected on that have helped me lead more inclusive Zoom meetings, virtual meetings, if you will. And also, as I sit in meetings, recognizing how I feel when some of these practical tips are applied and how that's helped me feel more engaged and included in the conversation. So being thoughtful about differences, what does that look like? I can't imagine, you know, I have two young children. I have a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old. And as you can imagine, some of the meetings I get in, what happens? All the parents immediately are, oh, my child, my children, oh, we've done this, we've done that. And we had an aha moment when a colleague of ours actually said, you know, I live alone. I don't have the luxury or the distractions that you all do in having other people living in the home with me. So it was an aha moment of, oh, wow, okay, this is one of those pieces of going back to the simple basics of, hey, how are you doing? Without that piece of, okay, I'm putting kind of my own biases or my own world into your world. Looking at different personalities, right? The introverts versus the extroverts in this virtual world. Looking at family situations, as I mentioned, security and job. This is another aha moment, as you know, we're talking about what it means to be working in this world. We've come up with that term of essential worker, and we've been struggling with that because, wait, to that quote from the very beginning, we're all working. Now, what's essential or deemed essential? And we've had to look at what that means. Wait, does it need to be on-site versus off-site work, right? So tweaking language in that way can make a meaningful difference. Social economic status. This has been very eye-opening as well as we think about, you know, individuals that may have office beautifully laid out, you know, office space set up at home versus the person that's in that 900 square foot apartment in San Francisco that needs to step out to have any sense of quiet and maybe won't even accomplish that being outside. But how do we look at how that impacts the way that we show up, and how do we create that sense of inclusion? And then of course the health piece of difference, looking at our own physical and mental health around being in a virtual space and how that plays out in creating more of a more of an inclusive culture. Gotta get familiar with here. Picking a theme for your meeting. This has been something that we've noticed has just really increased the way we've connected. You know, everyone wear a hat and come to the Zoom meeting, a scarf, your favorite t-shirt and why. It gives an opportunity for everyone. Now, if you're in these meetings with, you know, hundreds of people or more than 20 to 30, sometimes it could be difficult to have that, but that's where you can leverage the chat, you can leverage raising hands, you can leverage all kinds of different techniques to be able to encourage everyone's participation. 3 brains are better than 1. What do I mean by that? When we're doing bigger Zoom meetings, we love to have a trio, a team. You've got the presenter, you've got the person that moderates the chat, and you've got the person that is handling all the technical issues and challenges. That way it really separates that need to do, for that one person to do all the multitasking available around. And when you've got a dedicated person to the chat, really connecting in that way helps get more ideas, more innovation out and exposed. Acknowledging Zoom fatigue. How many of you have been in meetings where people have actually given you permission, not that we need it, but to say, hey, no need for the video, or hey, how many of you are just tired of Zoom meetings? Let's have just a quick check-in about that. Yeah, definitely. It's appreciated when people can recognize the elephant in the room, that we're sitting back to back meetings. I've had some leaders that have said, let's all just take a deep breath together. Why don't we do that now? Yeah, right? 3 seconds, barely. And we could go into all the research and the neuropsychology behind how deep breaths can help shift our attention and focus. But something as simple as that helps to ground everyone in an experience before jumping right into the agenda. Structure and set expectations. Now, this is a big one. And I, as someone who appreciates fluid structure, can really find the value and deem how important this is as we encourage people. You know, again, when we say video, up to you. Is there a preferred place for it? Chat, encouraging people to leverage chat. Looking at the reactions, you know, Zoom's got a lot of really fun bells and whistles around raising your hand. I'm stepping out for coffee break. I'm stepping away from the screen. I'm not bored with your presentation, Bindu. I just need to go grab some more water, right? And it really encourages a fairness in managing airtime. When we're able to encourage people to participate in a conversation and we say, hey, raise your hand, we can go in the order of raising hand, and it offers a seamless process of, oh, that awkward silence, that 1.2 silence, now that I know about that, What are things that I can do to either be intentional about that silence, so we guide people knowing why we have silence, or we're creating a seamless process of, I'm going to use the chat, raise your hand, I'll call on people in order, so we're able to move the meeting along smoothly. And as I mentioned, encouraging the bells and whistles of our virtual tools. You know, I think the founders and creators of all of our virtual work pride themselves on having all these added bonuses. So how can we encourage people to leverage that? There's whiteboarding, there's annotating. I mean, there's been some really cool ways to go ahead and vote on things to get people engaged in that way. Welcome people individually. There's something so powerful about mentioning and welcoming people by their first name. And again, the advantage of Zoom is everyone's name is automatically populated in there. So this is a benefit to us. I don't know, again, how many times I've been in meetings where people will do a round robin, state their name, and I've already forgotten half the names in the room. And here, we've got all the names available. So welcome people one by one. And again, if it's a larger room of individuals, it's okay to, you know, call on the first 5 or 10 people and say, hey, I see everyone. I recognize that everyone's here. I'm going to take a minute to slide through the tiles to just get a glimpse at everyone that's on the call. Something as simple as that really helps to encourage people to know that they're being seen. Add location to your name. Again, and you could do, I picked location, but we could do any kind of you know, topic area that creates a sense of engagement or connection for people. Favorite song, favorite music genre, favorite vacation place. You know, going back to number 9, picking a theme for your meeting. We've had people that have leveraged the Zoom background. My Zoom background is Lake Shasta. Went there with my family a couple weeks ago. And again, a point of connection. We start to see common themes. Everyone starts to place the beach on there. So it becomes a point of discussion. What's that about? Is that a good escape for us? So adding location, adding favorite place, favorite ice cream. I mean, anything that helps to foster a sense of connection. Nonverbal feedback. How do we pay attention to that nonverbal feedback? Again, without being so intrusive and staring at people, but really calling certain things out, recognizing that Jason's got his virtual background representing a very powerful statement, right? That's all I can see right now on my screen, so forgive me for that. Let me scroll through. And again, with those that have joined via audio, what are ways that we can encourage connection, participation in that way? And then the final, what I like to think is the number one, you know, in the top list of 10 is really, really doing those meaningful icebreakers to form that sense of connection. And why this is so important is because it, one, sets a tone. I have distinctly noticed the difference in terms of how I show up and how I feel when I attend a Zoom meeting where it's immediately, boom, here's the agenda, jump right in, business as usual, and check, 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 going through what the agenda outlines versus literally 30 seconds to say, how is everyone doing? Type it in the chat, raise your hand, use a reaction, use an emoji, whatever to help indicate how you're feeling. Sometimes when I start meetings, I should have done it for this one, but next time, I have this emoji chart as my screensaver, and then I just have people annotate and check off how they're feeling that day. It doesn't take more than a couple of seconds, but the power of connections, you'll see all kinds of research out there based on our virtual world of nothing beats the face-to-face meeting. But as we all know, we're doing the best that we can, and leveraging maybe some of these and some of your own can help to create more of that Zoom inclusion. So with that, I thank you. And I will open it up for Q&A just to see what works for you, what resonated, what didn't, and then it'll give me a minute to just kind of check out the chat and see what kind of fun comments have been leveraged there. Ida, thank you. Yes, Lake Shasta. Oh, it's your hometown.
It is.
Wonderful.
I do look at the backgrounds that people have. So I felt bad today that I hid myself. And that's the other thing too, is that it is different when you're speaking to pictures, because you're wondering to yourself, are they actually listening to me? Are they eating? And I was eating a plate of tacos, and I didn't want to be, I didn't want to have that on the screen, but I was coming straight in from another thing. So it was nice to have that flexibility, but I totally get when you're looking there and you're not getting that feedback, because that's part of the energy of it. Anytime you have a gathering or a meeting,
Yeah.
is being able to read the energy, even the head nods, that acknowledgement that someone is paying attention. And I'm always watching, people's eyes, and sort of seeing what's happening. And I was just right now just trying to move my screen where I have all the people underneath my camera. I think that's a big thing too, is because if the people are over to the side and you're looking over here, you're wondering, that just happened to be where all the people were right now. But then you might wonder, is this person actually listening to me, or is it just that happens to be where the people are, so
Right.
it is crazy. It was great.
It's so many, and I love that you were taking care of you. We had one leader that again, I love coaching. One leader that said, I want everyone's video on, and one, young mother was like, she turned on her video and it was baby in diaper, hair all over the place, and it was one of those, and the leader was like, oh, okay, I get it. And so one of the kind of ground rules that we talked about was, if you don't want to be in video, if you feel like giving a reason, okay, but let's all treat each other as adults and recognize that, hey, when you were in the office, I didn't need to come see you face to face and sit here staring at you, and you were doing what you needed to be doing. So how do we bring that same level of, again, inclusive expectation? I respect and value who you are and the work that you do, and yeah, it's okay. So appreciate that you were taking care of yourself and nourishing your belly. Ada, thank you. Anybody else want to share? I'm sure you guys have your own top 10 lists of what works for you.
Yeah, I haven't used this myself, Bindu, but I've been, it was shared with me from somebody who facilitates a lot of these meetings, and I thought it was a great idea, which is sort of goes to somewhere in the middle of your list. You had that, my words equal the playing field of who's out there and who, people, the extroverts can fill up the room, and when they get turned off on mute, they, oh,
I stopped sharing so I could see everybody.
Oh, okay. That was bizarre. Okay. They can fill up the room, right, with their voice, or if left to just be muted, they might fill up the chat room. And so this one technique is, if you're asking for group input and you really want to hear what everybody has to say, and again, probably a smaller crowd, is you say, everybody, I'd like you to answer this question, a couple of words, whatever it is, and then hold off. And in 30 seconds, I'm going to say, hit send, and everybody together. So you're not influenced by what other people said, that kind of thing. So I thought that was a cool technique that I'm going to try someday.
Oh yeah, I love that. Breakout rooms, of course, to create more of that sense of, and something that I learned, and every time I'm on a Zoom call, I learn something new, but everyone's tiles are not placed the same way. Right? So I'll say, I'm going through the tiles in my order, and someone will jump in. Virginia's giving me a thumbs up that, yeah. So I was like, okay, I'm going based on my tiles and how they're organized, and I'm going to call on people. So that way we're able to spread that time among everyone too. Now that's a good one, Mike. I really like that one.
I actually like how, go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to point Bindu to say, Jason asked an intriguing question. So maybe after your comment.
Oh.
Yeah, I was just going to piggyback on Mike's comment of one thing. Yeah, one reason why I do enjoy the chat is when I have been in meetings that are like 150 people, for like in some educator meeting or something, and we're all there, we all know who we are, but it is nice to actually have that way of being able to put a little something in the chat to be able to acknowledge you know, that we're having an experience of what they're saying, because we know the speaker can't see everything that's happening. And there's something about having the shared experience that there's a little bit of a side chat going on. So it's kind of that acknowledgement. So we would do that in a meeting. If you're sitting in a big meeting and the speaker says something kind of interesting, you're going to be like, oh, you know, and give them a little nudge or something. So it's kind of like the chat is almost that version of it in a little different way, but yeah.
Yeah, no, it has really tested my limits of multitasking sometimes. And I'm like, it's squirrel for me. I'll see a chat and I'll be like, oh, okay, wait a second. Okay, let me refocus. So now I just acknowledge it. And it's like, hey, that'll happen. If it's distracting to you, forgive me. I'll do my best to try not to, or I'll shut off the chat and have, you know, the three brains participate in that and really kind of delegate responsibility in that way so I can stay focused. But I so love the interaction and engagement there. And so, Mike, thank you for pointing out Jason's comment. Yes, so your question is, in that example that I had given, where participants met with anyone upset about cultural appropriation, and how as a woman who wore the hijab handle those conversations outside of, it was interesting. You know, it's funny because, again, growing up in Michigan and attending a lot of, you know, Indian events and watching other non-Indians wear Indian clothes, like it's so fascinating. I think with any topic in diversity, I think the power comes in having those conversations and those relationships. I mean, we only talked about what was shared in terms of their own experiences. And as she had the opportunity to have conversations with other women of Islamic faith, it helped her to understand where her biases were coming into play, and it gave them an opportunity to share what it meant for them to see others wearing that, right? And it came out of an assignment. I mean, I remember having a lot of conversations with my advisors and my mentors in terms of, ooh, this could be a little awkward, or how could this play out? And I think it was decided on that, you know, we would look at it through the lens of an activity that helps us to learn more deeply about what those biases mean. So I don't know if I answered that question, or if you would like to and feel comfortable in unmuting and kind of share some of your thoughts.
Yeah, I thank you for fielding the question. No, it was just a thought I had after you shared that story about like wanting to know more and being curious more about that experience and how she handled it, what she was exposed to, and how she was actually able to handle herself wearing something like that outside of the psychological space that you had created.
Yeah, she brought the class to tears when she shared her experience. I mean, I really wish I had documented that in a more powerful stance, because who knew where I'd be, like, you know, 20 years later doing this work in a corporate culture and looking at the power of that. And I find, you know, in academia, there's so many theories that look at how we can be more inclusive. And sometimes it feels like, especially in my consulting experience, you know, corporate environments are trying to figure it out. And it's like, wait, the research is all there. Let's just try converting some of the theory into practical application and what that could look like and what that would mean. But yeah, it was a powerful experience for her in terms of being that vulnerable and recognizing that her biases had really shifted once she walked in the shoes of someone else, literally, or in the ethnic wear, literally.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, any other questions, feedback, comments? No? Well, again, thank you. Thank you so much to David and Yoel. I want to make sure that I highlight that, you know, David and team have been very focused in terms of creating more and more forums of this nature. I'm sure many of you have attended and will continue to attend, but I want to put in a plug for tomorrow's Lunch and Learn, if you will, with Shara Roman. She will be talking about dance like nobody's watching. A sense of belonging is a key to innovation and success. So what a great primer. And we didn't even plan it this way. We didn't connect or anything. The universe will bring you what you need when you need it is my theory on that one. So hope to see you all there tomorrow, and welcome Shara. And I really, really appreciate the level of engagement and nonverbal body language and smiles and thumbs up and all of that. So thank you all so much for that.
That was terrific, Bindu. Thank you so much. And thanks, everybody.
Bindu.
Thank you, Mike. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Be safe, be well.